Nick Clark's death wasn't just another character exit. It was the moment that Fear the Walking Dead lost its entire soul. This was a character who survived withdrawals in the apocalypse, walked among the dead like it was nothing, and carried the emotional core of the show on its back. And then boom, just gone. Mid-season, no build-up, no payoff at all. Frank Dillane's decision to leave might have made sense to him, but for the story, it was absolutely devastating. And honestly, Fear never recovered, as you guys know. So today, we're diving deep into the wasted potential of Nick Clark, why his exit broke the show, what could have been if he stayed, and how one character's death sent Fear into a downward spiral that it just never crawled out of. But tell me in the comments before we go any further, do you think that Fear ever recovered after Nick's death? I personally don't, but I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about it. Fear the Walking Dead was supposed to be different. It was supposed to be an entirely different thing than what we got. Like, where The Walking Dead focused on survival after society had already collapsed, Fear promised to show us the beginning, how it all unraveled, and at the center of that story was Nick Clark, a heroin addict who woke up to the end of the world before anyone else did. From the very first episode, Nick's perspective set Fear apart from anything else. He wasn't a cop, a soldier, or some hardened survivalist. He was a damaged kid whose instinct turned out to be sharper than anyone else's that we've seen, at least in terms of the franchise. Like, while others were still in denial about the whole thing, Nick saw the truth. He saw it firsthand. And ironically, his addiction made him one of the best suited to navigate a world that was falling apart. Frank Dillane's performance made Nick just magnetic. He was unpredictable, vulnerable, and resourceful in ways that we hadn't seen before in the franchise. Over the first 3 seasons, Nick's arc took him from a confused addict to someone who could walk among the dead, live off the land, and who could stand toe-to-toe with warlords. He became Fear's emotional heartbeat and its most original character. I would actually argue that Nick Clark was like the epicenter of Fear the Walking Dead. Him and Madison, but Nick especially. The show was centered around him. But everything changed heading into season 4. Behind the scenes, Frank Dillane made the decision to leave the series. The showrunners decided to kill off Nick early in the season, and the story's entire trajectory shifted. The family drama that defined the early years gave way to something very, very different. I mean, at this point, we had already lost Travis, we had then just lost Nick, and shortly thereafter, we also lost Madison, so the show went from a really strong family dynamic to something just else. They had to completely redefine the show. Like, Nick Clark's death wasn't just a character exit, it was a creative collapse point. Up until that moment, Fear the Walking Dead had a clear emotional anchor. Nick was flawed, unpredictable, and human in a way that no character in the franchise ever was, like I'd already mentioned. But through his eyes, the apocalypse wasn't about moral speeches or Rick Grimes-style leadership. It was about raw survival and personal transformation, almost in a way that was like a precursor to the Whisperers. I know that's not where it was originally going to go, but I know the original premise for Fear the Walking Dead was going to be how this group starts to live off the land, become more raw, and eventually become villains. And you could see that foundation starting to form in terms of the story. They obviously couldn't do it because of what happened. Because when Frank Dillane decided to leave the show, it forced the writers' hands. But instead of weaving a thoughtful departure, they went for shock value. Nick's death in season 4 wasn't earned. It wasn't part of a long-term story arc. It was abrupt, mid-season, and ultimately meaningless to the larger narrative. And that's where things started to just unravel. By removing Nick in that forceful way that they didn't just lose a character, it lost the show's entire point of view. Nick's instincts, his walker camouflage abilities, and his complicated relationship with Madison gave Fear a flavor that was just entirely on its own. After his death, the series changed away from family dynamics, like I mentioned, and grounded survivalism towards something more fragmented, tonally inconsistent, and Morgan-centric. It literally felt like Morgan and Friends after we had just got a family drama that like divulged the family into this gritty demeanor. We got that, and then this just felt like a different show. It was like the Clark Show, and then Morgan and Friends, with all sorts of different things like no one's gone until they're gone bullshit. Like, fuck you. I'm sorry. Fuck you. I'm going off script for this, but it just pisses me off. Okay. Anyway, that big pivot from the Clark Show to Morgan and Friends alienated a lot of the original fan base. People tuned in for the Clark family and the grounded, slow burn apocalypse, not a clunky crossover that felt like it belonged to a different series. Nick's exit became the turning point where fear stopped feeling like fear. And honestly, if you look back, season 4 onward feels like a show constantly trying to fill the void that Nick left, but just never truly succeeding. Like, they tried each season, it didn't work. They tried another season, it didn't work. They just kept doing it until one day they were just teleporting all over Georgia in the swamp, and then there was like Shrike and all of that shit. It really sucked, if you guys couldn't tell. It pisses me off. But to really understand how much Nick's potential was lost, you have to look at his journey season by season. His story had layers that no one else on the show replicated, and the moments that defined him prove why his death was such a mistake. Nick's introduction is still one of the most memorable in the entire franchise, not just Fear the Walking Dead, but like at large. He wakes up in an abandoned church, confused, high, and surrounded by the dead. Through his terrified, unreliable perspective, we witness the apocalypse's beginning. He wasn't a sheriff or a leader. He was a screw-up who happened to notice the world dying first, and that made Fear's opening uniquely haunting, because no one believed him. They thought he was just high and insane, because he kinda was high and insane, but he was actually right. And that perspective is something that it's so original and so thoughtful. I loved how they introduced that show. But Nick didn't survive because of brute force. He adapts. In season 2 and beyond, he learns to walk among the dead, blending in by covering himself in walker blood. Before Rick's group ever thought to do it consistently, Nick was living in that mode. Which I always find funny, by the way, because in The Walking Dead, it's such a plot hole that they just completely stopped doing that. They did it like very, very sporadically in terms of the show, but they just gave that up. But like, Nick Clark did it all the time. That was like his thing. He did it all the time. He becomes almost feral, living out in the wild, observing herds, moving with them, literally like he's a whisperer. It gave the series a fascinating perspective. Like, what if someone embraced the apocalypse instead of just enduring it? Like, again, the whisperers, because I think that's what they were setting up. I know they say they weren't, but like, this is that. But it wasn't just that either. There's other things like Nick detonating those explosives at the dam in season 3 to protect his family. It's the peak of his character's arc. It was kind of also the end of it for the most part, but it's reckless, emotional, and heroic in a way that's just completely true to him. And he does it in a way where he doesn't give any speeches or he doesn't make any bold statements. He just like does his thing and moves on. He's Nick, impulsive, loyal, and willing to die to protect the people he loves. That moment should have set up the next phase of his evolution and not serve as the beginning of the end. But shortly thereafter, then came the gut punch. Charlie shoots Nick in a split-second moment of revenge, and just like that, he's gone. No epic send-off, no long arc that pays off years of development, just shock value. And the worst part, the show spends the rest of the season dancing between flashbacks and the present, trying to give him emotional weight after the fact. It's like they've realized too late that they killed their most compelling character. And I know Frank Dillane wanted to leave, but that's not the problem. I've tried to convey this in another video before, all about the rise and fall of Fear the Walking Dead, which you could watch up here, but they could have done it differently, but they didn't. And because of that, each of these moments highlights a trajectory that just should have continued. Nick had the makings of a mythic survivor, or in terms of The Sopranos, a varsity athlete. That's a stupid joke. But anyway, so the point I'm getting at is he was someone who could have evolved into a legend within the universe. Instead, his story ended just mid-sentence, where he said, "Charlie," and that's it. What the fuck? Now, Now, with all that being said, there are definitely some counter arguments that always pop up when Nick's death gets brought up. And the first one is obvious. It's one that I actually just brought up, but we're going to dive into it a little bit more. And that's Frank Dillane wanted to leave. What else could they do? Sure, that's true. Like, he made his choice to exit, that's for sure. But here's the thing. How you handle that exit really matters just as much as the decision itself. The writers didn't have to kill him in the middle of the season in a blink and you miss it sort of scene. They could have written him out temporarily, had him disappear into the wilderness, or set up a long-term arc that gave his character a meaningful send-off. Instead, they just went for quick shock, and it cost them dearly. It was almost like they did it out of spite because Frank Dillane was bitter and wanted to leave. But that in turn literally just shot the show too. The second argument is that the show moved on. Morgan, Alicia, Strand, they carried it. Except they didn't. Morgan's introduction shifted the tone entirely, as I already mentioned. What was once a grounded, messy family drama became a wandering, philosophical crossover. Strand and Alicia sure had their moments, but without Nick, the Clark family dynamic just straight up collapsed. And also because, like I said, Madison was gone too. So it was just them two to deal with this shit. Like, who thought of that? You take the two most important people out of the show, and the heart of the series is just gone, and what was replaced was just, it never fully clicked. The reality is, Dillane's departure didn't have to mean the creative death of the show, but the way they handled it made sure that it was. And I've been on record saying this before, and I'm gonna say it again, even though it is the writer's fault for making these decisions and leading it down this path, it still kind of was Frank Dillane's fault for leaving because he didn't like the way the show was going. Like, it's not his fault. I know that's a hot take. It's not his fault. If you want to leave, you want to leave. But, like, because he left, that was the catalyst. Because even if you had Morgan and Alicia in the show, but you didn't have Madison, you could still have that Fear the Walking Dead edge. Because Fear the Walking Dead was Nick Clark, just as much as Rick Grimes is The Walking Dead, just as much as Dexter Morgan is, like, Dexter is Dexter Morgan. You know what I mean? Like, Nick Clark is the show. Madison is too, for sure, like I said, but it's just like, I don't know. Do you know what I mean? In the end of the day, Nick's instincts, his unpredictability, and his unique relationship with the apocalypse made him the soul of the show. When he died, that soul just straight up vanished. The series never truly found its footing again, no matter how many crossovers, time jumps, or villain arcs that they threw at it. And like I said, it didn't have to go down like that. Imagine a world where Nick survives season 4. Instead of dying mid-season, he just disappears. Maybe he grows delusioned with the constant conflict and chooses to live among the dead again, evolving into a lone, almost whisperer-like figure years before Alpha ever appears. Over time, he becomes this mythic survivor roaming the wasteland, popping in and out of the story to challenge Morgan's ideals, anchor Alicia emotionally, and serve as a bridge between the show's original cast and its later characters. Hell, they could have even left the door open where if he goes off and lives amongst the dead, you could bridge that, because it did work time-wise, you could perfectly bridge that to the Whisperer's arc, and maybe not even mention in The Walking Dead that Nick Clark was there, but it's implied that he is part of the Whisperers. Do you know what I mean? Like, you could keep that open while having him out of the show. Like, that arc would have kept Fear's original DNA intact while expanding its world organically. It would have given the series a thematic spine to build around, a survivor who represents adaptation, not just endurance. And honestly, if Nick had lived, Fear could have surpassed The Walking Dead in its later years. I know that's a bold claim, I completely understand that, but that's how much potential he carried. If they had kept that momentum going that season 3 had, and just Nick's overall vibe into the later seasons of the show, we're talking about two completely different universes, two different shows. Like, it would have been drastically different if they didn't make that decision, even if he wanted to quit and do his own thing, and that was like a permanent decision to him. Just keeping that option open, knowing he's out there, knowing that there's that connective tissue, and maybe focusing on some of that a little bit. it just would have been so much better. So here's my question to you. Was Nick Clark's death the biggest mistake that Fear the Walking Dead ever made? Drop your thoughts in the comments because it still stings for me.